some parents, they don't understand. They think that it's a disease, so they bring to the hospital. They bring their son or daughter to the Kru Khmer, which is the traditional daughter. So there are some hitting from the Kru Khmer, or can be discriminatory action to prevent, to cure that it can be a bad soul. Some parents, they lock their family member in the room. They don't give money. They don't allow them to go out and make some friends and so on. That it is the misconception and understand that leads to discriminatory practice to their son or daughter.
We can call it a little bit worse because there was homophobia and stigma and discrimination.
When we're talking about the LGBT situation in Laos right now, actually in Laos right now we have no specific law and policy to support LGBT in terms of employment, and also most of the private sector in Laos, they still lack of their inclusion policy, and also the gender diversity policy also not included in in-house policy of many of the private sector in Laos as well. So many of LGBT in Laos still lack of opportunity in access to equal employment, particularly in the private sector.
So, for more than 20 years now, we have been lobbying for a national anti-discrimination legislation, but because of a lot of misinformation, the bill is still lingering in the Congress.
Discrimination and stigma still permeate institutions and public perception. And narratives of discrimination, harassment, and violence contradicts the common misconception that the Philippines is generally LGBTQ friendly or accepting of the LGBTQI community.
At the moment, we have to reply to that question from the angle of COVID, because the situation is serious for everybody, and on some fronts, more serious for various groups. For example, on access to healthcare, it's difficult for the majority of the population generally, but for trans people, it's often doubly difficult at this point in time because of difficult travel to a hospital or non-accessibility of various provisioning, such as hormone treatment, as well as the unavailability of doctors and nurses. So situation is serious at the moment, and it can also be looked at from the angle of more seriousness in regard to various groups, including LGBTI.
It starts with APCOM learning about what the World Bank at the global level is doing with LGBTIQ rights, and the World Bank itself and the finance sector. So the idea was to try to get the Asian Development Bank to do the same. Chosen were, at least they're familiar.
This project is really important for APCOM, primarily because it is the leading LGBTQI human rights project as part of a new strategy.
There was the evidence that proved that there are still something not inclusion in our society.
The Financial Inc. is a project that is led and run by APCOM. It wants to engage the business sector on LGBT inclusion, and it is a very rare project that is being undertaken in Asia, and is particularly important in this historical moment when there are more debates about LGBT issues in the region.
First time that I've seen a project that is focused on the issue of financial inclusion for LGBTI people, for sexual and gender minorities. And an important part of what they look at to try to move this agenda is how is the most important development bank in the Asia Pacific region, the Asian Development Bank, ADB, which is based in Manila, how are they thinking about or beginning to think about this issue of LGBTI inclusion, and specifically, how are they beginning to think about financial inclusion for LGBTI people? Really critical, because this is an important financing partner of many governments in the Asia Pacific region.
We could not deny that economic development always play a vital role in terms of improving our livelihood. So it should serve if everyone, people are important and should put at the center when it comes to economic development. It's not about increasing the GDP of each countries, but it's supposed to show the actual result.
The LGBTI people are also a group that needs particular attention and maybe a focus of some program. So that I think is where, again, Finance Inc. can be so influential in helping the Asian Development Bank and the people who work there about those needs and to provide linkages to the community. Because that's the other thing that businesses and development banks often need, but don't necessarily have. So Finance Inc. is a kind of bridge as well between the community and these institutions.
The most important one is, of course, respect for human rights, which is something we have all signed up to, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And that basically, no matter what your color, your race, your religion, or your sexual orientation or identity is, we have to respect it. Secondly, there are many studies that show that if LGBTI people feel comfortable, feel well treated, feel equal to others, that also has a positive spin-off on their functioning in society in terms of producing as well as other people and so on. So I think these are all reasons to treat them totally equally to anybody, any other civil person in society.
So Finance Inc. is about inclusion of LGBTQI people in Asia Pacific. For this particular project, we are working in 4 countries, in Laos, Cambodia, Indonesia, and the Philippines. And for APCOM, it's actually about how do we connect with community partners in those countries and working together and learning about the inclusion of LGBTI people, particularly on the economic inclusion. The pilot, but also really one of the highlight of APCOM's work on LGBTQ human rights engagements, particularly in terms of looking at economic engagement.
Finance Inc. is being supported by Voice Global and our country partners. In Cambodia, we have Microrainbow International Foundation Cambodia. In Indonesia, we have Suara Kita. In Laos PDR, we have CHIAS. And in the Philippines, our partner organization is Babaylanes.
Suara Kita vision is attain LGBTQI equality and emancipation as Indonesia citizens.
For Suara Kita, involving the private sector is a new thing. We are learning, there are challenges, and if there were Finance Inc., we wouldn't have learned for this.
For CHIAS, we have 4 main needs right now. The first one, we are focused on the health, community, right, and gender. This project is trying to encourage the LGBT people in access to equal the employment with the private sector in Laos.
Babaylanes is also APCOM's country partner in the Philippines for the Finance Inc. project. Finance Inc. is a multi-country initiative that aims to engage financial institutions and the private sector to be more inclusive to the LGBTQI community.
For us, this is one of our first projects in Babaylanes, and I think it has been a great experience for both of us to handle such project that we were able to work with other organizations from other countries.
It's very special. It is an empowerment project and initiative project that aiming to economic inclusion for LGBTQI people and the private sector to be more inclusive. In Cambodia, there is only MOIF Cambodia works on economic empowerment of LGBTQI person. Values to MOIF Cambodia on economic empowerment toward LGBTQI people in Cambodia. MOIF Cambodia basically focus on LGBTQI inclusion in the private sector through development of advocacy tools and awareness raising in Finance Inc.